Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. My next guest is somebody I met in the fantasy community a while back, actually put me on to my current favorite team's quarterback in Zach Wilson. My man it's in his DFS, is literally in his Twitter handle. It's DFS with Dan. The guy is very sharp as it pertains to DFS, and a Bengals season ticket holder. So obviously you know which team we're talking about today, and the analyst I'm talking about today is Dan McCullough. Dan, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on, brother.
John, man, thanks for having me. Good to be here. And as you said it, season ticket holder, and I'm really excited about this year.
Well, let's jump right into that, man, because the Bengals have seemingly found their quarterback of the future in Joe Burrow. He unfortunately suffered a season-ending injury, and the Bengals ended up finishing 4-11. They made the effort to surround him with playmakers and adding former college teammate Jamar Chase. Did forego the opportunity to draft Penei Sewell, but they did add some O-line help later in the draft. Expectations probably aren't all that high for the Bengals relative to the other teams in their division, mainly because of the other teams in their division. But Dan, what are the expectations around Cincinnati and as it pertains to the Bengals and heading into 2021?
Yeah, I think the expectations inside of Cincinnati are a lot better than they are outside of Cincinnati. I think that one decision in the draft, as you referenced, to take Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell has really cast a shadow over the quality job they've done over the last two off seasons, but this offseason in general. Because I don't really see Detroit making the playoffs either. So the impact of one player isn't as significant as some make it out to be. But I think from a fantasy perspective, Jamar Chase landed in probably the best place he probably could have landed, being paired with his best friend, Joe Burrow from college. Obviously, everyone saw what they did together in 2019. And I think, the numbers will be scaled back a touch due to the NFL competition, but I think that they're going to have an explosive start right from the jump, week one against Minnesota. So I'm really excited about that. But also one thing that gets overlooked by that draft decision is the free agency that the Bengals have had. Not last year, they brought in DJ Reader, Trey Waynes, Von Bell. Trey Waynes missed the entire season, so he's almost another free agent addition this year. So he's a starting corner, along with Chidobe Awuzie from Dallas and Mike Hilton from Pittsburgh, which I think is one of the most underrated signings of the season. So they have entirely new starting cornerbacks. I think that'll bring some energy to the defense. And then, as you mentioned, they brought in some depth on both lines, offensive and defensive, in the draft. They drafted 3 offensive linemen, 4 defensive linemen. They signed Trey Hendrickson, who was tied for second in the league in sacks last year, 13.5 sacks. And then on offense, they signed Riley Reif, which I also think was extremely underrated signing of the offseason. He rated 5th in the NFL in pressure rate last year. He played 1,003 snaps and allowed 1 sack. And he was also only penalized 1 time. And when you look at the failures of the Bengals offensive line last year, obviously sacks and pressure were huge, but penalties were another key piece to the struggles of this team. And they brought in several players that had 1 or 2 penalties last year. So they brought in disciplined players from good programs, the Steelers, the Saints, the Vikings, well-coached teams. And I think that speaks to the culture they're trying to build. And pairing that with professional rookies like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Jackson Carman, guys from programs who have won a lot in college, you're looking at a lot of players who have experience winning, and I think that's kind of what you're looking to build as a coach in the NFL, outside of the fantasy realm, but more of like the team realm. I think they've done a really good job, so that's why I'm so excited heading into the year.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually never looked at it through that lens, which is why I wanted to bring on people that are fans of teams, analysts that are fans of teams, because getting that fan perspective, right? Like I mean, I'm assuming in the same way I am, right? Like you're reading all the reports out of minicamp, all the reports out of OTAs, more
Yeah.
than you would any other team in the league because that's your team, that's the team you care about. You're obviously a season ticket holder, so you're passionate about it. Um, let's talk about Joe Burrow. Like I mentioned, recovering from the ACL injury that caused him to miss the final 6 games of the season. Burrow is someone that I pegged in going into 2020 as my breakout quarterback, mainly because of the amount of volume that he would provide in terms of pass attempts. And we saw that play out as he had 404 pass attempts through his first 10 games.
Yeah.
Obviously missed the final 6. He was on a 16-game pace, though, of 646 pass attempts, which would have led the entire NFL. He did have a 3.2% touchdown rate, which was well below the league average of 4.6%. So there's some room there for some positive regression in the touchdown department. He was the QB 17 in terms of fantasy points per game, shade over 17 points. Going off the board as the QB 13, Dan, according to 4for4.com's aggregated ADP. What do you think of this price point on Burrow?
I love Burrow at quarterback 13. I mean, personally, I wouldn't let him fall that far. But one thing I think that gets lost on how good he looked last year is the fact that they didn't have OTAs. They didn't have a preseason. So we're talking about a rookie quarterback who got thrust into his first NFL action was week 1 against a really good well, on paper the stats didn't look so good against for the Chargers on defense, but Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, quality pass rush, and he got thrown into the fire and looked. He's like you said, he struggled. He didn't his red zone efficiency, his deep ball accuracy wasn't great. The touchdown rate was low, but I think that's why they needed to address receiver with Jamar Chase. I love AJ Green, but they were trying to use him in his traditional deep threat role, and he just kind of evolved into more of a 10-yard move the sticks type of guy rather than a downfield threat. And so I think swapping Jamar Chase will increase that touchdown rate and deep ball efficiency. And as you mentioned, one of the reasons I'm so excited about the outlook of all these players is the amount of plays that the Bengals are running. Not just pass plays, but their offense was in the top 3 for plays run in those first 10 weeks when Burrow was healthy. So I think they're trying to establish pace in their offense, and they have pieces that can move all over the place, with Mixon being able to split out wide and Uzama being able to split out wide, and Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, they can play slot, they can play outside. They have a very flexible offense, and I think Joe Burrow, quarterback 13, that's a bargain, given the fact, like you said, it's probably not going to be a season that they're winning a ton of games, and they're going to be running a ton of plays. So if that efficiency increases, he will surpass that QB 13 volume and probably play more like a QB 1 than in that QB 2 tier.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because he sits on the border of the QB1 tier. He's basically a QB1, sitting at QB 13. And then you ask yourself, like, okay, well, realistically, how many guys do I want ahead of Joe Burrow? And right, I think we start having this conversation, right? Because Aaron Rodgers is, still his ADP is still in the top 12. Because people really don't know what to do with him. And if I'm picking today, I'm gonna pick Joe Burrow just because,
Of course.
I'm safer that way in terms of my draft picks a little bit. But also the thing about Joe Burrow that I thought last year, you referenced it coming off, he didn't have an off season. I thought that he was probably in better position than any rookie that was coming out last year because he was the only one who knew exactly where he was going.
Yeah.
And so those Zoom calls were really beneficial to him. He was learning the offense basically before his name ever got called. So that was I think that part is interesting. But
I agree.
you
And
know, you
I think that speaks to the Jamar Chase pick.
yeah,
It's essentially a plug and play guy who knows the offense. He's got a great relationship already with your your cornerstone piece, that quarterback, like you talked about. So, I mean, yeah, that was just, I love that decision, but I'll probably reference that 5 more times.
No, man, it's all good. I mean, now that you're talking about it, I'm kind of thinking about it too, right? Like Joe Burrow, who knows this system, obviously can literally go to Jamar Chase and be like, "Hey, no, this is just called that in the LSU offense," and Jamar
Exactly.
Chase is like, "Oh, okay," right? And so he could just kind of be the mentor for him to translate it to him. Um,
And the one
yeah,
thing that's come out of OTAs about Jamar Chase, everyone obviously knows he's talented, but his professionalism and his ability to learn this playbook has blown the coaches away. And that's essentially what Joe Burrow told them going in is if you draft this guy, you're getting a guy that's smart and he's going to come in right away and want to learn and be the number one guy.
yeah, no, that's definitely huge. I mean, look, I want to jump into receivers, but I gotta talk about Joe Mixon first, right?
Of
Because
course.
this is a pressing topic. I mean, people are on opposite ends of the spectrum in fantasy Twitter. It's either you love Joe Mixon or you hate Joe Mixon. And it's felt like it's been that way for two plus years running now.
Yeah.
Mixon seemed to be a pain for a lot of fantasy managers to start the year. Started out rough out the gates, averaging just 9.1 PPR points through those first 3 games. But then he averaged 24 PPR points over the next 3. That does include a 42-point explosion in week 4, but hey, it still counts, right? It happened.
Yep.
But on the year was the RB10 in terms of PPR points per game, was on a 16-game pace of just over 1,100 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 69 targets, which I think doesn't get talked about enough, to go over 360 receiving yards in the passing game and another 3 touchdowns. Mixon going off the board right now, Dan, is the RB12. Is this value on Mixon appropriate?
So yeah, I mean, Joe Mixon might be the most polarizing player in fantasy right now. You're either with him or you hate him. You love him or you hate him. RB12. I mean, again, it kind of depends on which side of the table you're on. I think that's about where he'll finish. So I think if you're just going for straight up value, I think that's probably gonna work out for you. Um, he does get a lot of hate. The one thing I'll say, and I'm going to reference that the fact that they didn't have OTAs in preseason. I mean, these defenses were stacking the box against Joe Burrow. They were forcing him to beat them, change the play, call things at the line, and that was tough for a rookie right away. And so Mixon struggled, but then they played a team like Jacksonville week 4, like you said, that didn't really have the manpower to stop Joe Burrow that way. And that opened the offense up, and you saw what Joe Mixon was able to do. So I think the departure of Gio Bernard plays a big factor in Mixon's role expanding in the passing game. Like you said, 69 targets. Or no, what was it?
He was on pace. He was on a 16-game pace to 69 targets.
Targets in 6 games. Yeah, I mean, if that, yeah, 61 or yeah, so he'll turn that into 40 catches for 350, 400 yards and a couple scores. I mean, that added production onto, if you look at 2018, I meant to reference this when we were talking about the offseason. One thing I didn't mention, the Bengals brought back their offensive line coach from 2018. And that's that year Joe Mixon led the AFC.
Was that Frank Pollock?
Frank Pollock, yep.
Oh, I know that guy.
And yes, you do. And look what he did for Frank Gore. I mean, but Mixon he loves Frank Pollock. When they signed him, he went crazy on Twitter. So I think you look at that stat line, close to 1,200 yards. He had 55 targets that year, 43 catches, 300 yards. If he turns in a season like that, 10 total touchdowns with 1,500 yards and 40 catches, you're looking at RB12, RB10, something like that. So I think that value is appropriate. And I think people are going to get great value on him because there are so many haters right now. And whoever takes him, if you can get him at RB16 or something in your league, you're going to get a bargain. An RB1 that's going to be playing a ton of snaps.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's funny because I have him exactly as my RB12 here, so I feel like it's a cop out. But I've got him over 1,100 yards. I've got him with 54 targets, which turns into 43 receptions for a little over 300 yards. So in that 1,500-yard range that you were referring to, uh, I think it's appropriate. I think I mean, I have him as my RB12, so I'm
Yep.
with you. If I'm in a league and I know people don't like Mixon and I can get them in in a cheaper situation relative to what he's actually going for, then give me that all day.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, when you're talking about running backs, if you can't get one of those elite guys, you're looking for workload, snap percentage, and Samaje Perine is not going to cut into Joe Mixon's workload.
you know,
Um, so yeah, of those second tier RB1, RB2 guys, he's definitely at the top of my list in that grouping.
Yeah, definitely. I would 100% say so. Let's move on to the flavor of this team, man. We know where the bread is buttered here. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
mentioned before, Bengals use the number 5 pick on Jamar Chase, reunite him with Joe Burrow, the talented wide receiver, man. He's an absolute alpha, and many, myself included, as I'm sure you do as well, Dan. Many expect him to continue to be that in the NFL, continue to be that alpha wide receiver. Second year wide receiver T. Higgins jumped on the scene early as a rookie. 16 games, he had 67 catches for 908 yards and 6 touchdowns. I mean, it was really like 15 games because he got hurt in game 16, I think it was, which is a
yeah,
bummer because I would have loved to see him go over 1,000, which I'm sure you would have loved to see that too. But he was good enough for wide receiver 40 at just over 12 PPR points per game. His season was obviously it looks better when you look at his time with just Joe Burrow. If you look from weeks 2 to 11, week 2 was when he was inserted in the starting lineup on that Thursday night football game against the Cleveland Browns. He's the wide receiver 24 as opposed to the wide receiver 40, and that points per PPR points per game gets a bump of 2 points where he goes to 14 and a half PPR points per game. So, and that's a rookie playing with a rookie quarterback. So to me, that's impressive. And then you add, I'm gonna call him Mr. Reliable, man, Tyler Boyd,
oh yeah.
who from weeks 1 to 11, man, with Joe Burrow in the lineup, comes in as the wide receiver 14 at 16.2 PPR points per game. These guys, this trio of wide receivers going off the board as the wide receiver 23 for Chase, 26 for Higgins, and 34 for Boyd, respectively. So all tightly packed within the position group. Which of these guys do you prefer, Dan, at their respective prices?
So based on the price point, I love Jamar Chase. I mean, I'm thinking when I'm drafting my first receiver, I want a guy that's going to draw a lot of targets. And the Bengals drafted Chase with a plan. Um, and the plan is to feed the beast. I mean, this guy is built like a running back. He's 6 foot, 205 pounds, maybe 210. Um, he is built for contact at out wide, and I think they're going to feed him. If you look back at a couple of the early games, they were trying to feed AJ Green. He had double-digit targets, I believe, in 2 of the first 3 games, and that didn't work out very well. So they're going to be targeting Chase down the field and trying to open up that passing game underneath for Tyler Boyd. Another under talked about storyline of this offseason is the transformation that T. Higgins has made with his body. Joe Burrow and the coaching staff have raved that he looks like a different player. He's got deep speed and he's added upper body mass that he didn't have last year. So everyone's excited about him. The one thing about this group, now I love the trio and I think it's either the top or the second trio in the NFL, but somebody is bound to lose out on the touchdowns. I mean, I don't think it's possible in Joe Burrow's second year coming off this injury to have all 3 of these guys consistently catching touchdown passes. Unfortunately, I think that guy is Tyler Boyd. I think he'll have a lot of consistency in the middle of the field, and he'll be a great player fantasy-wise in that wide receiver 3 tier. But given Chase's deep ball ability and Higgins' frame in the red zone, I think those guys will draw more touchdown or red zone targets, and Tyler Boyd will be more in that wide receiver 3 where close to 1,000 yards, heavy, probably 8 to 9 targets a game, but he may not score as consistently as these other two guys. I think their value is great. If you can get these guys at wide receiver 23 for Chase, wide receiver 26 for Higgins, and wide receiver 34 for Boyd, I think they'll all exceed that. But I don't think there's a wide receiver 1 in the group.
Yeah, it's interesting. You let off saying that you think Jamar Chase they drafted him with a reason. Obviously, reference to the first 2 games of AJ Green seeing double-digit targets. I'm with you on that one. I have Jamar Chase leading the Bengals in targets this year. T. Higgins with a close second. I think those two guys, they're so much. Their roles are so similar. I think within this offense, being obviously like you said, they're going to move around a lot because they have the versatility with all these guys from Jamar Chase to even T. Higgins to Joe Mixon to C.J. Uzama, all these guys, right? So they have that versatility, but at the end of the day, if we had to say what's their best formation or their best lineup, it's Jamar Chase on one side, T. Higgins on the other, with Tyler Boyd working out the slot. So to me, like, I would not be surprised if either one of Jamar Chase or T. Higgins leads the Bengals in either yards or touchdowns. Right? Like
Absolutely.
it wouldn't surprise me. I think they could put up identical stat lines almost.
Yeah.
Like you said, Tyler Boyd is probably where it gets interesting, because I guess since I prepped for the show, he's going as wide receiver 35, so we're getting him a little cheaper now. But Tyler Boyd, to me, like you said, I think he still goes over 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
I just think he's going to lose out on those touchdowns, right?
Yeah.
And I think from a PPR perspective, I'm okay with that,
Yeah.
right? Because I want that weekly production. If the touchdown comes, it comes. And the thing is, you're not paying an expensive price for it, right?
Right.
I think of all these guys that are going within this range, right? Like Robbie Anderson, Devontae Smith. I mean, Jerry Judy. We might have to have a conversation, maybe potentially, but Debo Samuel, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, Curtis. I want Tyler Boyd.
Yeah. When I'm looking at my tier 3 guys, I want guys that I'm looking for a high floor, not necessarily a high ceiling. And I
Yeah.
think Tyler Boyd gives you a very safe floor. Like I said, he'll draw around in this offense at this pace, 8 to 10 targets a game, 7 to 9 targets a game, maybe. And he's going to catch about 70-80% of them. So that's going to give you 6 for 70, 7 for 90, something like that every game. And then the occasional touchdown sprinkled in, and you got a great pick as your wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you can get a guy this late, I mean, who's going to see? I think all 3 of these guys can see near 20% of the targets because there are enough. Like, who are they throwing the ball to, right? It's going to be Joe Mixon or one of these tight ends. But for a team that throws the ball so much,
Yeah.
right? Like, even 18% of the team targets is a lot compared to some of these other teams, right? And so Tyler Boyd's going to easily see 100 targets. And you're
Absolutely.
telling me that at that point in fantasy drafts in the 7th, 8th round turn, I can get a guy that's going to see 100 targets?
Right.
That
Exactly.
just makes too much sense, especially in PPR leagues. So let's
And
move on to. Sorry, go
like
ahead. Go ahead.
one more thing, like you said, the Bengals' best formation is when Tyler Boyd's on the field, and he's competing in ADP with some guys who aren't even on the field for 80% of the snaps in a game. So that alone gives him an uptick in that tier of players. The fact that he's on the field for 90% or more of the snaps every single game.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a Bengals team that's going to run 3 wide receiver sets 60 to 70% of the time.
Yeah,
Tyler Boyd is a starter.
absolutely.
So, yeah. No, absolutely, man. I'm with you 110% on Tyler Boyd. And this is interesting because last year my co-host and I, Greg Penniman, we had an interesting heated debate. AJ Green versus Tyler Boyd. I was team AJ Green. He was team Tyler Boyd. And here I am advocating for Tyler Boyd. But hey,
Yeah,
man, we react to new information.
that's right.
So um I gotta ask you at this tight end position. And you talked about Uzama before, man, but I don't know, man. CJ Uzama obviously leads the Bengals tight ends in terms of ADP. Tight end 41, he's going off the board as. He
Yikes.
was the tight end 6 in PPR points per game last year. Did only play 2 games, but
Yep.
was the tight end 6 at 11.4 PPR points per game. Suffered the Achilles injury. He's a little bit older at the tight end position, so that makes you a little bit weary. Drew Sample filled in, but he actually didn't because he didn't do anything. So Dan, I have to ask you, is there any reason to target a tight end from this group?
Yeah, I mean, whew, it's not a sexy group, that's for sure. The one reason though that I have a little hope for Uzama, and this is like last round, second to last round, this is a total dart throw flyer, is Joe Burrow really likes him. He was one of the first guys to reach out to Joe Burrow when he was drafted, and he immediately went to him and tried to train with him to get a little chemistry moving. Joe Burrow's first touchdown pass was to CJ Uzoma. And you mentioned his Achilles injury. He and Joe Burrow trained rehab together all offseason. So I think they trust each other. Uzoma is kind of the de facto veteran. Him and Boyd are the oldest guys on offense in the skill group. So I think for some reason Burrow's going to lean on him a little bit more than people think. And not that he's ever going to be someone you plug in every week, but in a bad matchup, at a thin position, I don't mind adding him to the end of my bench. Drew Sample, yeah, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, he is never going to be the guy. I don't think he's on the radar. But I will say he was graded as the 7th rated run blocking tight end. So if something happens to Uzama, there's no doubt that he'll be on the field a ton. So, but yeah, I mean, I just can't see a world where I'm starting Drew Sample or CJ Uzoma in fantasy unless there's a tight end purge or something.
You mean like there is every week unless they score touchdowns?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I meant about Uzoma. In a bad matchup week, there's dart throw potential. It just depends on the matchup and how the receivers match up that week too.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think I'm gonna pull it up, but I'm pretty sure he saw 11 targets through 2 games, if I'm not mistaken. CJ Uzoma did. Um, but if I'm getting a tight end that's gonna see 5.5 targets, right, from Joe Burrow, like I'm not gonna say I'm gonna leave my draft at CJ Uzoma, but at the end of the day, like I'm
Yeah,
gonna pay attention to 11 targets through 2 games, right? Like I'm gonna pay 10. Sorry, what was that?
eight catches on 11 targets, so
Yeah,
efficient.
yeah. So at the end of the day, right? Like I'm gonna pay attention to that. I'm gonna take note of that. I may not leave my draft with CJ Uzama, but I may draft like a higher upside guy, like maybe Gerald Everett, right? And let me see how that works out. And if through a week or two, Gerald Everett's not doing anything or not getting targets or it's not going the way I thought, and I'm looking at CJ Uzama and he's still getting those 5.5 to 6 targets a week, I'm probably gonna go pick up CJ Uzama off waivers and then try to make that work.
I see him as kind of like a Dawson Knox. He's not going to play every week for you, but there's matchups where he'll, like you said, he'll probably draw 5-6 targets, and probably 2 of those will come in the red zone. And if you catch a touchdown with 2 catches and 30 yards receiving, that's a pretty good day at the tight end position. So, yeah, he's someone that I would look at, especially on DFS, because he's going to be bottom of the barrel in price, but not someone I'm, like you said, going to leave my draft with. But at the end of the draft, I might throw a dart out there and grab CJ Uzama in a draft or two, especially if I have Joe Burrow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, man, if you're in a PPR league and you could get a scoop a tight end off weight, like Dalton Schultz, right? Like he wasn't great,
Yeah,
but I was playing Dalton Schultz because he was getting 7, 8 targets a game from Dak
right,
Prescott. So I'm like, okay, this is cool, right? Like I don't care what the 7, 8 targets do, really. I mean,
right,
just catch like 5 of them and we're good. 5 for 50. If you get the touchdown, I'll live with it.
right. Exactly. I mean, if you look, and I don't have it in front of me, but if you look at the top 10 tight ends, I would bet half of them were off the radar around draft season. You have Tanyan, you have Logan Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
Dalton Schultz, like you said. He didn't have a huge year, but the tight end position didn't have a huge year. So he was probably close to that bottom tier of tight end ones, middle tier tight end two guys. So, yeah, it's kind of tight end is just a crapshoot. So I wouldn't bank on it, but I'm watching the situation.
Wow, this is more time that we're talking about the tight end position and CJ Uzama than I had budgeted for.
And anyone,
So,
yeah.
so Dan, man, I don't want to take up too much of your time, brother, but I got to ask you one more question before I let you go. I'm asking every single guest on every single series we do, so Bengals not going to be any different. How is this division breaking down? Where are the Bengals finishing?
Well, I think the Bengals made a statement last year in that Pittsburgh game in Week 15. You know, they could have laid down. It was Monday Night Football. Joe Burrow was out. Ryan Finley in. Joe Mixon's gone. So it's Ryan Finley, Samaje Perine. Those guys could have laid down. We had guys like Carlos Dunlap quitting on the team, demanding trades, saying this place sucks. There's no culture. Somebody thought there was culture. Von Bell from the Saints, you know, a perennial playoff team, impacted that game against Juju with that hit. Everyone saw the hit, the fumble, the return for a touchdown. I mean, the Bengals won that game, and I think they made a statement. I've touched on these free agents they've brought in from these teams that traditionally win a lot of games. These players aren't afraid of the Steelers. Like Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton clearly saw some potential in what the Bengals are building here to come over across the division. This is a division where you don't cross the lines very often. Players don't go from AFC North team to AFC North team very often. And I think that made a statement that they're definitely being recognized as a team that's building something. But I think that obviously the division runs through Baltimore right now. But Cleveland, I mean, I guess you could make the case that it's going to run through either Baltimore or Cleveland. Cleveland had a pretty good offseason. Those two guys are the heavyweights in the division, but I think the Bengals could surpass Pittsburgh this year. The Steelers just lost David DeCastro, and they already didn't have a great offensive line. With an immobile Ben Roethlisberger, I just don't see how much longer they can keep that thing going. So I'm excited about that. Any Bengals win over the Steelers gives me a lot of excitement, but I think they kind of take that and have some momentum going into this year. And again, they're not going to win the division, but I think if they get a couple wins in the division, you have to consider that a good season for them. So I'd say they finished third in the AFC North over Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh falls to fourth in the division this year.
Wow. Yeah, man. I mean, look, like you said, it's a two-horse race, it seems, between Baltimore and Cleveland. That's been the general consensus here on the as we talked to each analyst from each team in the division. I'm here reminiscing. You brought me back to that Week 15 Bengals game. I was very invested in that game. It was my semifinals of my one of my most important leagues with my friends from college, and I was going against the Steelers defense
Okay.
on Monday night, and I had Deontay Johnson, and I was like, I think I was up by like 10 or something like that, and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna win.
Yeah.
And then Ryan Finley, man.
I mean, I don't even think he saw that coming. I mean, what a pleasant surprise that game was.
Yeah, but I was also tilting because I just needed like a point, but Deontay Johnson had gotten benched because he was dropping the ball. So I was like, no, I need Deontay back in the game so he can catch at least like another pass.
Yeah.
So I can. So it was very, very nerve wracking. But then it didn't matter because Alvin Kamara scored 6 touchdowns the following week to bounce me from the.
Oh yeah.
So, but anyway, man, I'm glad that we got to talk Bengals with you. I'm sure you're glad you got to talk Bengals too.
Oh yeah. Having me on, man. I had a lot of fun, and yeah, I'm more than excited about this upcoming season. I can't wait.
Nah, man, that's awesome, Dan. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, what you're working on, and and what you got cooking these days.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at DFS with Dan. No underscores, no spaces or anything, just DFS with Dan. The off season is pretty slow in the DFS world for football, so I've just been doing my research and watching how the teams are building their or using their off seasons to improve their teams, and just kind of preparing that way. And other than dynasty leagues, I'm just working on getting prepared for the 2021 season.
There you have it. So if you're checking out, if you're looking for some DFS content, you are looking for some DraftKings tips, make sure you check out Dan on his Twitter, DFS with Dan. And yeah, Dan, appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you taking the time to come on. And everybody listening, we hope you enjoyed it. And we will catch y'all next week as we break down the NFC North. Have a good one, y'all, and we are out.